Hey man, the founding fathers didn't think that people would have military weapons, and they didn't know anything about, machine guns and scary looking assault weapons. And the Constitution doesn't say you can have any weapon. So go ahead, man. Get all the muskets you want, right? Ooh, hummingbirds. What's up, dude? Wait.
Well, let's talk about that, and welcome to the Liberal Gunner. Okay, so here is an argument that anti-gunners, let's just say that people who are ignorant of firearms and firearm issues, including the Second Amendment, are making an argument that the Constitution doesn't specify the type of firearm. The only firearms that the Founding Fathers knew of at the time of creating the Second Amendment were muskets, and therefore they couldn't envision anything that would shoot any quicker or be any better than a musket. I don't think that it's reasonable to assume that the Founding Fathers were so unimaginative that they couldn't possibly think of any type of firearm or imagine that a firearm could be any better than a musket. First of all, they had rifles back then. So they had rifled barrels, which could shoot farther than a musket, but they were slow. I mean, these are the guys who imagined the founding, a new ideal of government, right? They were so unimaginative that they created out of thin air, basically, a new form of government, a new type of government. Founding Fathers also knew about other types of firearms that were, yes, they were new at the time. They didn't have machine guns, but they did have firearms that could fire more than one shot at a time. These were very expensive, and they were pretty rare because during that age, we didn't have an industrial revolution, so we didn't have factories turning out firearms at the rate that we have today. So firearms back then were all individual handmade firearms. At the time of the Revolutionary War, the colonists really didn't have a lot of firearms. They were using parts and pieces and cobbling together a lot of firearms. The federal government, there wasn't any federal government yet, but the fledgling government didn't have any money to really buy weapons. They had to borrow money to buy weapons from France. So I think we do a disservice to the Founding Fathers by assuming that they were that unimaginative. The second part of this ridiculous nonsense is that the Founding Fathers didn't think that the general populace should own military weapons, right? The Second Amendment is about personal protection and not the ownership of military type weapons. Yeah, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense considering that they were trying to form militias out of the general populace.
You're an idiot.
The British Army had all kinds of muskets and rifles. The colonists also had muskets and rifles. Now the rifle in those days was a slower weapon. Okay, it was harder to load, it took longer. Muskets were quicker. They had bayonets. So after you fired your musket, you could defend yourself or attack with your bayonet, or a pistol, or a sword, or some other knife. Okay, these were the implements of war for the common soldier of the day. The rifle, however, did not have room for a bayonet, and these were not as prevalent, but they could shoot far more accurate and at longer distances. So while they were used and they were very decisive, rifles, in several battles during the Revolutionary War, the common person in the United States, the common person in the colonies, owned a musket. Okay? People in that day had to hunt and fish and farm for their food. Couldn't go to the grocery store and get a turkey for Thanksgiving dinner, which they didn't have back then anyway, but you get the point. The point is, you couldn't just go down to the local market and get something for dinner. Okay? If you wanted duck, turkey, venison, you had to go out and shoot it. And it wasn't a problem for most people. Everybody knew how to do these types of things from a young age because it was the way you survived. Some understanding of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights would be helpful here. Some people believe that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, tells the people what their rights are. This is incorrect. The Constitution delineates and limits the power that we, the people, give to the government. Okay? This is a government of we, the people. We elect our representatives. Our representatives make laws according to what we, the people, want. Supposedly. So, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights don't give you rights. You have rights. You have some natural rights. There's a difference between natural rights and natural law. Okay, so you can make laws like laws against thievery. Okay, this is not a natural right. This is not a natural right. You don't have a natural right against thievery. We make that a law in society. We basically say, you don't steal from me and I won't steal from you. Unfortunately, some people, they're going to steal from you anyway. Therefore, we make a law that says, if you steal, if you break this social compact, if you break this law, there's going to be punishment. Okay, that's different than natural rights, which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, all other rights kind of flow from those. So you have the right to life and liberty, which means that you have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to defend your life. Just to make sure we're clear, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, do not give you your rights. It limits what the government's intrusion on those rights might be. Right? You have the right to free speech, but not that I agree, I'm just saying Justice Scalia famously said, rights are not absolute. They're not unlimited. The First Amendment, right to free speech, can't stand up and yell fire in a crowded theater. Okay? There are restrictions on those. Notably, one right out of all the rest says that you shall not infringe on this right. Okay, the First Amendment doesn't say you shall not infringe, the government, the people, shall not infringe on the right to free speech. It doesn't say that. None of the 10 original amendments of the Bill of Rights says shall not infringe except for one. There is one right in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. This right is so important that the government and the people may not infringe on this right. What does infringe mean? Well, look it up. Infringe means any type of restriction whatsoever. Okay, now we already have all kinds of infringement on our right to bear arms. All kinds. You have to go get a license and a tax and, register if you want to have a machine gun. You can have a machine gun, possibly, if the stars align and you can tell the government a good reason for you having a machine gun, a tank, a fighter jet. You can have these things. You can own a cannon. Okay, you can own a mortar. It's going to be costly, and you're going to have a good reason. Can't just be Joe Blow. Hey, I want to have, an M60 machine gun. Just want to have one. Okay, the government's going to say, well, you don't have a good reason to have that other than you just happen to want it. So they may not issue you a license. Now, if you own a business, maybe you own a shooting range or you have a training facility and you need to have an M60 machine gun, you can apply for a license. You'll probably get it, pay some money, lots of money, and you can own these things. Okay, these things aren't banned, they're restricted. Right, you want to own a Thompson machine gun? Go ahead. Put in the paperwork, pay the money. You can have one. Okay, so the point here is that muskets and rifles of the day were the military weapons of the day. And of course, you want your army to have the best military weapon you can have. Right? I mean, today we don't send off our military with muskets because we have better weapons. Why would we tell our military of the time back in the late 1700s, oh, you can only use a sword. You can't defend yourself against Indians with a musket because that's only for the military. You have to use a knife, a hatchet, a sword. It's nonsense. So hopefully you can understand now that this argument that the Founding Fathers couldn't imagine a better weapon than a musket. They already had rifles, they already had cannons, they already had mortars. They already knew of better weaponry. They just weren't mass produced. They weren't available. So I hope this dispels this ridiculous notion that some of you have out there. You're trying desperately, have an argument to try and get rid of ARs. Oh, it's a military-styled weapon. Okay? Founding Fathers understood that military weapons, every time a better, more efficient, more effective, easier to use, faster weapon was produced and shown to work well, the military adopted that weapon all the way through to today. So the argument, which is not an argument really at all, it's just nonsense, that the Founding Fathers didn't mean for the populace to have military weapons, nonsense. The general populace was the military, so obviously they considered that the people of the United States forming a militia would have military weapons. It's a no-brainer, right? So here we are today. We have a Constitution, and we have a Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks for watching. Be safe out there. Subscribe. Train with your weapon. Be well regulated.